Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rosie. We're delighted to be partnering with the Authors Guild, and we're really excited to be at the Center for Fiction. Also, thank you to my esteemed panelists here, Jennifer Baker, Tracy O'Neill, and Amanda Clayman. I'm really excited about tonight's program, which is the last in a three-part series presented by the Authors Guild and Electric Literature. For those of you that don't know about Electric Literature yet, our mission is to expand the influence of literature and popular culture by fostering lively and innovative literary conversations and making exceptional writing accessible to new audiences. We're committed to discovering new voices and celebrating emerging writers through our weekly fiction magazine, Recommended Reading, where we welcome submissions from unagented writers. At electricliterature.com, we publish reviews, news, essays, and more. It's also where the Writer's Wallet column was recently launched. And we also engage with the literary community through events just like this one. So that brings me to tonight's panelists. I know I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure you guys all have a lot of questions too. So after a moderated discussion, we'll open it up to audience questions. So Jennifer Baker is a publishing professional with 13 years experience. She's the creator and host of the Minorities in Publishing podcast, panels organizer for the nonprofit We Need Diverse Books, and social media director and writing instructor for Sackett Street Writers Workshop. She's the editor of the forthcoming short story collection Everyday People, The Color of Life from Atria Books, and she has contributed articles and reviews to Forbes.com, The Billfold, and Bustle, as well as other online publications. Amanda Clayman is a financial therapist who helps bring people and money into balance. She founded the financial wellness program for national arts nonprofit, the Actors Fund, where she pioneered a cognitive behavioral approach to financial education. She also runs seminars and groups for corporations and is the author of several courses for lynda.com, the online learning arm of LinkedIn. You can learn more about her work at amandaclayman.com. And Tracy O'Neill is the author of The Hopeful. In 2015, she was named a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, longlisted for the Flaherty-Dunnan Prize, and was a Narrative Under 30 finalist. In 2012, she was awarded the Center for Fiction's Emerging Writers Fellowship. Her writing has appeared in Granta, LitHub, Volume 1 Brooklyn, The Literarian, New World Writing, Narrative, Guernica, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Bookforum, Rolling Stone, Grantland, Vice. It just keeps going. Her column Body Language appears in Catapult, and she currently teaches at the City College of New York and is pursuing a PhD at Columbia University. So thank you all very much. So as everyone knows, or hopefully knows, taxes were due yesterday. How many people here paid their taxes early or waited until, how many people wait till the last minute? How many people were like super stressed out about that even though they knew they were doing it ahead of time?
Who is making progress by not doing it late this year?
All right. So, with that sort of fresh on everyone's mind, I think that would be a great way to start. How do you guys prepare for tax season? And sort of what have you learned over the years to make it easier for you?
I can start. Oh, wow, that was loud.
Yeah,
I usually do taxes early. I'm usually an early person because I know I'm usually getting a refund. There was a couple years where I didn't. I won't go into that. But this year, because I had signed a book deal, well, last year, 2016, I had signed a book deal, I knew I was going to owe money. And I have a full-time job, so I get taxed already. So that's not the income I'm worried about. I'm worried about the side jobs where I'm not getting taxed. And this was a year where I did a lot of side jobs. And then I had the partial advance from the book deal I signed. And knowing that, it made me hesitate because, and then the election happened and you're like, what do y'all need the money for? I need it more than you do. But I knew I had to pay it, so I waited. I did the taxes early, saw what was happening, and I waited to file the taxes. But I usually prepare much earlier. You get your paperwork usually January, February, and I keep detailed spreadsheets. of deductions. And maybe that's something we'll get to later, but I tend to, throughout the year, keep a tab of what my deductions are throughout the year. So when I'm sitting there, it's not as though it's like mounds of paper, what am I screening? I'm actually organized, it's just sitting down and doing the work, which I think as writers, sometimes that's the hardest part as well, right? Is like, you have to get your butt in that chair and write. I have to get my butt in this chair and pay someone a lot of money I don't want to pay them. So, yeah. That's it for me.
Well, I keep a folder, and I just stuff receipts in there. Some of the receipts I later realize are not even things that I can write off. But I stuff a lot of receipts in a folder, and then I hope for the best, and I go back through them later in February if I'm good about it, or like April 13th and a half if I'm not good about it.
Yeah, it helped to have those extra days this year because usually it's the 15th. And I was like, it's the 18th? Awesome, that's plenty of time. And I said that on the 15th. Like, I'm going to finish watching Chewing Gum on Netflix. Priorities.
And I'll offer personally, even though I'm not a professional writer, just to sort of have it out there from the beginning, financial behavior is something that I understand very well. It doesn't mean that my own financial behavior is quote unquote perfect. Taxes are a great example of that. I think my husband and I were doing our taxes in the car on the way to go see my parents last week, like trying to finish up getting all of the expenses and things like that in. But the reason that I asked in the beginning, like, who's at least making progress, is we used to have to file for an extension literally every year, and so for 2 years we have paid on time, and I consider that a victory.
Yeah, I paid early this year, and I didn't recognize myself. Really strange, yeah. Very weird experience.
See, if you want to make that a habit, you have to reward yourself and give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah. Well, before we get to like kind of like best practices and cognitive behavioral tactics, I guess, techniques, Jen, you mentioned keeping a list, the spreadsheet of deductions. Can you talk about a little bit about like what you deduct and what you find is appropriate? What might be like a stretch that you hope no one calls you out on?
I deduct everything imaginable. In all honesty, again, before when I just had a full-time job, I used to be married and there were 2 incomes coming in. So it wasn't, it was just like we just worked our full-time jobs and that was doable. And then my husband lost his job, so I became the sole provider for our family. Not easy with a publishing salary in New York City. So that's when I took on freelance work, and that's when I got to know, oh, there are these things that you can deduct when you do freelance work, and da-da-da-da-da. So I do freelance editing, I do freelance writing, I do freelance teaching. So there are things like going to conferences to better become a better editor. I deduct the tuition fee for that. Application fees that I submit for residencies and said conferences. Those are presumably helping me become a better editor, a better writer, so that I can go out, have time to write, pitch places, get that money. That's what I deduct. I deducted my website. I redesigned my website. That's my business card. I deduct business cards. I deduct, I do my podcast. I deduct materials spent on the podcast because that's media. That gets me into other places that I can write about. I deduct food when I travel for said conferences, travel to said conferences, my internet. I deducted my rug, my carpet, because it was mandatory for my apartment, and I do a lot of freelance in my apartment. Therefore, because I had a mandatory need for my apartment, I deducted the carpet installation. I deducted my desk. I deducted, I was writing something about Game of Thrones. Guess what got deducted? HBO. Like all these things that I can, if someone came out and said, how does this relate to your writing? I have something I can point to and says, I got paid to do this, I got paid to do that, I got paid to do this, this is the receipt. Getting to and from Sackett Street workshops, teaching those, and not wanting to take the train late at night. That's a freelance job, taking cab for that. I deducted that as well. So there are just so many things you can deduct. I didn't get ridiculous like buying new shoes because I didn't want to stand for an event or something like that. But if it can be correlated to the work itself, I would deduct it. And that saved me a lot because with the book advance and then the other materials that I was making from like working for Forbes for a bit, doing Sackett Street, I owed the government like $12,000. That was combined, state and feds. I owed $12,000. Once I started chipping away at those deductions, it got to like 7,000, which isn't a great number, but it's way better than 12,000. Also deducted my cell phone too. I'd use that all the time. That's my primary way to get for people to communicate with me. So cell phone costs, new cell phone, how much I pay for that cell phone, and that saved me about $5,000 to pay the government.
$5,000 that didn't come out of your personal income.
Exactly, exactly. And you can deduct your taxes as well. Not the taxes itself, but tax preparation.
That must be like a fairly comprehensive and very long, it sounds like, spreadsheet.
Oh, it's an intense spreadsheet. It's like, who did I donate to? Like, people think, like, I think I'm a good person, but a lot of my deductions go because I'm like, I can totally write this off. And if you get to a certain point, it makes a difference, too.
So you mentioned you have a spreadsheet that you have going. Tracy, do you have like a spreadsheet or some way that you're keeping track of finances, aside from the envelope full of receipts?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I check my bank account, like I'm seeing where I'm at. I used to work in the service industry, and so I was making cash, like I was being paid in cash. And that was actually great because,
Which
you know,
you paid taxes on, right?
which I paid taxes on. But that was actually great because when you have physical money, you're sort of very aware. If you only ever pay in cash, like you know exactly what you're spending your money on. So I think I still use cash a lot, actually. Like a lot of people, especially freelancers, will say, oh, well, you know, like I have like a business card or something like that, but I'm a cash girl.
Well, it's so easy to just keep spending when it's on a card, right? Because you don't see it all the
Right,
time.
exactly. You actually see a dwindling wallet if you are a cash person. So
Yeah, it's very like apparent metaphor for
yes,
your financial situation.
yes. Oh, but the other thing is, if you use Lyft or Uber or something like that, I do have a tab in my Gmail that is like a receipts tab or whatever, and I just send all of my Lyft receipts there because the only time I ever really use Lyft is going to and from literary events and other things that I do for work.
Amanda, do you have sort of best practices for keeping track of where people are financially, deductions, all this stuff that could be applied to sort of like a more general writer habits?
It's funny because I get asked all the time, what's the best way to organize and manage my money? Like, or what's the best app? People are often like obsessed, like there's gonna be a technology solution that will do it for you. And I think that the best app for managing your money is your calendar. Because the thing that we really need to do is to be able to pay attention to money. And I sometimes think that our fantasies about an app will do it or the spreadsheet, or like we get so fixated on method, because what we're really trying to do is avoid paying attention and all of the feelings that often come up and how stressful it feels when we're sitting down and looking at some of these things. But it is in fact a sort of regular practice that I think helps us more than any method. And in fact, if we have a regular practice, if we're in regular contact with our money, then we can be a little bit more in tune with the different method that's going to work best for us. Like some of us are visual processors, some of us are more, it's funny, you can actually like create a story with your money. You can really think of it in a sort of narrative way. But whatever it is that's going to help you really sort of engage and understand, that's the thing that you should be empowered. I mean, I've sketched things with clients who really need to sort of see a representation or have a kinesthetic experience with writing it down. So I think that we each need to sort of like, the thing that makes you special and helps is your sort of processing superpower. Think about what that is and how you might find a way that you can find a sort of financial expression of that.
And you've also talked, or you mentioned it earlier, the sort of like cognitive behavioral therapy and how that relates to money and sort of rewarding yourself, which I think for a lot of people, thinking about money, thinking about their financial situation is associated with a lot of anxiety, and it's not always just scarcity. Like how will I pay the rent? I mean, as we discussed, mo money, mo problems. So, what are some ways that, like, techniques for cognitive behavioral therapy that could help people become more comfortable, like, confronting their money situation? And
Well, one of the things that I see a lot, especially with artists, is that there's a real sort of emotional sensitivity that makes you a creator can sometimes, when your sort of instrument gets dialed up, if you will, like emotionally gets dialed up, the way that money sometimes does in terms of pushing that stress button, that is the time that we pay attention to money. Otherwise, people sort of avoid it and they don't think about it. So it's either I'm avoiding this entirely, or oh my goodness, it's become so stressful now I need to pay attention to it, and then you just dive in like a 5-hour stressful rabbit hole. So one of the things that we sort of need to do, I think, first is decouple financial activity from a stress cue. So thinking about developing a regular financial management practice. Like this is, you're never going to be done with money, even at the end of this 5-hour sort of like boot camp that you put yourself through. You're still going to have to do money in the near future. So we want to try to sort of start by regulating that experience and that practice for ourselves a little bit. To anchor it in your, like I said, your calendar, like have a time where you know that this is when you're going to get to it. But in terms of the cognitive behavioral piece, here are some things that people often don't think about. Like if you have it in your calendar that you are going to say that you're going to look at your accounts or reconcile your receipts for the week, and Sunday afternoon is going to be your time to do this, it's good to have a beginning time, but you also want to have an end time. And part of the importance of having an end time is teaching yourself and really sort of like rewiring yourself almost to experience money as safe, to take out, and then to put away. So you know that it's okay that at the end of this half hour or this hour, whatever you've sort of assigned for yourself, that you can safely sort of box it up and say, you know what, whatever's left, I know that I'm going to get to that in the next period. And this helps you not feel like every time I open up money, I fall down into this experience that I end up feeling really depleted. Which sends the message to yourself like, money is too much for me. I was right to avoid it before. This is unsafe. Oh my gosh, I'm going to avoid it again for as long as possible. So we're sort of retraining ourselves by having that beginning time, that end time, and then afterward to do something to reward yourself. I mean, the reward is really important. Because if you are able to experience yourself doing money as feeling good, feeling competent, feeling strong, feeling like you're giving yourself credit for growing and trying something new, these are things that get reinforced and we tend to do them more. And it's one of the things that can be really challenging if that type of a structure is unique to all of the other ways that you live life. So this may be, like if you're a person who doesn't have a regular writing time, for example, you just sort of like you simmer, then you wait, and then sort of the idea comes in, then you go into this extended flow state. What I'm describing is probably pretty different from how you might manage other parts of your life. So, start small and give yourself credit for trying to do something that doesn't necessarily come that intuitively to you. But I like to say necessity is a friendly muse. There are things that you can learn and grow from, and I think money sometimes points us in interesting directions in our life in terms of ways that we can sort of tap into something new, that we need to learn in a way that we can grow.
So when I think about like sort of smart financial habits, I think of budgeting, which makes me think of that word adulting, which I think is one of the worst words that anyone has put together lately. But obviously, it's a useful thing to do if you're willing to do it. Do you guys have a budget that you stick to? And if you do, how did you sort of develop it, and what do you do to like make sure that you're adhering to those goals?
Well, I think that sometimes I make up rules for myself, but these rules are apt to change on any given day. So like sometimes I will say to myself things such as like I will not spend more than $25 on food like in a given day. Like that is something that I have at times adhered to and at times not as much. But yeah, I would say just creating rules for like a week or a month, like even if you don't stick to it, maybe you're at least kind of being a little bit more aware.
I go paycheck to paycheck, and I think it's different depending on how you earn money, right? So if you're freelancing, you might be more reliant, and you don't know when you're going to get some of these checks. But I get paid twice a month, so I go by how often I get paid. And I know one paycheck is rent, and then I know I usually look at my account, my checking account, because I also put in the savings and other things. I say I don't want to go below this amount until the next paycheck. And then the next paycheck, I don't want to go below this amount to the next paycheck. So like monitoring what my needs are. Do I need vitamins? Is this on sale? Like when toilet paper and paper towels go on sale, I go insane. Like I'm just like, you just see this woman lugging all these things because I'm like, it's on sale. I won't need this for 6 months. So there are certain things I'll just kind of splurge on because I know it'll last me a while, but I usually have a number that I'm like, I don't want to get below this number until I have to look at the next check, and then paying bills between those and recognizing that this is how long it's going to take you to get paid again. How much can you live on between those 15, 16 days?
Oh, and that's the other thing too about freelance work is that sometimes you can do this thing if you have a mostly full-time job or like the job where you make sort of like your essential money and then you have freelance work, you can be like, oh, my freelance work money is only going to be for like fun stuff.
Exactly.
So, you know, like if I haven't done a freelance job this month or something, then I just don't get to have any fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up an interesting question. Just like, you know, like you hear like Philip Roth retired recently, right? But the idea of a writer sort of retiring, it sort of feels like they're giving up on like almost like their identity. But on a practical, like financial level, you know, you have to reach a certain point before you're able to step away from your work. So are you guys saving at this point in your life? Like, are you thinking that long term? Or are you thinking like maybe someday I won't live in New York or I will live in New York, but I'd like to own an apartment? And Amanda, you know, weighing into, especially on like practical, simple ways to start that process.
Do you want me to start with that, or do you guys?
You start.
To yourself.
So being an artist is an identity and it's a job. And when we think about retirement as being this cliche, like I mean, how many of you really want to spend 20 years of your life golfing or walking on a beach? Like if you don't connect with that, that's not a really useful motivation. So I think maybe a more flexible definition for retirement is like if there are two reasons why people work. We work for money and we work for love. So define retirement as the time in your life where you are financially independent enough where you can only work for love. You can choose whether or not you want to do that project, but you have the sort of financial security that enables you to do that. And then you can work forever. But thinking about that, I think practically is one of the big challenges because so many of us are in sort of the paycheck to paycheck hustle that it can be hard to think of those bigger things. So I like to think of planning for retirement as a little bit like doing a puzzle. That, you know, the first thing that you look for is the image on the box, right? So what is it, when you think of yourself in that period of life, just sort of what do you see? Do you want to live here? You know, do you envision sort of going to someplace a little bit quieter? And then thinking about what are the edge pieces of the puzzle. So what can I know? What's the information that I can gather about this? So you can know, I mean, depending on your faith in the system, you can know about like Social Security, if there are any other sort of income streams that you can potentially count on in that period of life or how much money you'll need. Like you can start to sort of sketch it out such that you make that messy middle just a little bit smaller. And then I think that helps it not be quite so overwhelming. So just start with what you can frame that with, so that you can help yourself take the steps. Because when somebody when somebody says to you, like, you know what you need to retire, you need $1 million in the bank. Like, how many of you think, that's super motivating, I'm gonna get right on that $1 million. And how many of you find that completely depressing, and it just feels like it either happens by magic or you don't know how it's going to happen. So I think we need to be careful with those sort of really, really big pronouncements about what people need to do, because a lot of those things are what make us turn off from the process entirely, when really there are some things that we can do to at least make ourselves a little bit more informed or a little bit more prepared than we would be if we just throw up and say it's $1 million or bust.
Sure.
Well, I mean, retirement is, first of all, I think that it's great to plan for your retirement. But of course, we don't really know if we're going to make it to retirement now, do we? So, I know.
Or is it realistic?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm getting at is that possibly delaying, your job being something that is like a joyful experience for you, or something that at least gives you a lot of pleasure, is not really necessarily a great idea, I think. And I have totally had a lot of jobs that I have hated. But I guess, not that you were saying, I know you weren't saying like, oh, when you retire, you can think about a job you love. But, if you're in a job right now that you hate, that's, not great either. And you could at least make your way into sort of liking your job somewhat, before you're 65.
Yeah, if you can retire even at 65, because that's not a
Right.
possibility for a lot of us at this point, sadly. I am saving for retirement. That's connected to my full-time job, and it's not enough, as T.I. Kraft likes to remind me every month. And it's kind of like, if you retired today, could you live on this amount? And those are actually the things I'm getting in the mail, and I'm just like, shut up. I like living by myself. I'm not. I'm paying this rent, but it's kind of this shameful thing of like you're giving what you can, right? So it's like this little thing, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's enough if you're with a company that's telling you it's like you need to save more, you need to do more. So it's a hard thing to balance. It's a hard thing for me to say to people, you should save more, when it could very well be beneficial, but also 401ks and 403bs are just tied to the stock market. And if the stock market crashes, you lose a lot of money at the same time. So it's a gamble in a way. It's not a full gamble, but it is money that you potentially will see a big loss from due to circumstances not in your own. I know I'm making this sound awesome. But I would also say, if you could talk to people, talk to accountants, talk to financial planners, opening retirement accounts is actually something that can save you on deductions. A friend of mine who is a writer, she owed even more than I did. And working with an accountant that her family hooked her up with, they opened a retirement account, and that actually really cut down on how much she owed the government. So it may be something to look into, just to see how much can I put in, how much can this potentially save me if I do a majority freelance career, and will it make me feel better at the end of the day? Because it is something you can also tap into, even though you will get penalized if you tap into it, but it can also be somewhat of a cushion in terms of need.
It is true that you can have $5,000, up to $5,000 tax deductible into an IRA each year.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 5,500.
Oh, right, they raised it, you're right.
And then some of it you can withdraw, like if you need it for like a down payment on a home, you can withdraw it, like the principal, I think, but you can't withdraw the interest.
The gains.
The gains, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How are we doing on time? Good. So, Tracy, you mentioned having some terrible jobs.
Yes.
I won't ask you to disclose those if you don't want to. But for you, like, what would be the ideal job if it wasn't writing full time? Like, what would be sort of afford you the sort of creative freedom and financial security to support the kind of writing that you want to do?
Right. Well, I would say that my goal is to get tenure, within a university teaching, which is very much tied up in writing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
How about you, Jen?
Oh, what's my goal? Wow. I work in publishing, as mentioned, and I'm a production editor. So my job is more about making sure the book is done right and then getting it to the printer and all that good stuff. So I don't have to acquire books. So I read a lot, but I don't have to worry about the stress of acquisition, which I think is a very good balance for writers in general, because then it's very 9 to 5. And you don't have to worry about going to conferences and all these other things, and you can do that for your writing life. So I think I found a good balance. I wish publishing paid more. I think I'm at a decent place as long as rents don't keep rising. Please God, rents don't keep rising. But for me, I'm in a good place. I just wish, in terms of city life, it was more accommodating for artists, which unfortunately New York is becoming less and less of for working artists.
Can I answer this one too?
Yeah,
actually?
please.
Because I had a really eye-opening experience this year, transitioning from agency practice into having my own business. And I sat across the desk from artists from 10 years, and I felt like I knew like the freelance creative woes backwards and forwards. And then I came on the other side of that desk all of a sudden. And it was a very intense shift in terms of, like, I sort of joked one day, I was like, I didn't realize that having your own business came with a side of mood dysregulation disorder, which is a therapist joke, about sort of the highs and lows of, like, when it's going poorly and it's sort of just on you, it feels like everything is super hard. And then when you have, like, the good days and it's going well, it's all way up here. And what a challenge that is in order to sort of even out and to develop systems for accounting and to develop time management systems and to have what I consider a practice of integrity, because this is I went into this work because I wanted to work with people around the issue of money, and I felt like it was a very underserved issue. So I feel very passionate and committed to the work in this sort of creative and generative way. And so to find a business that holds that and contains that and pays my bills but is still authentic is something that I still really am actively sort of chewing my way through in a way and trying to experience it as exciting and growth focused as opposed to just overwhelming and terrifying.
Actually, just sort of as a sort of follow-up question for you two, how do you find the balance between the work that you're doing so that you can survive, right? The work that you're, like the writing that you have to do to pay the rent, versus, the work that you're doing that sort of makes you feel alive?
So maybe one way of answering that is saying that I don't necessarily make the work that I do to just get by my writing. So I should disclose that the primary way that I do make money actually is by pursuing the PhD at Columbia. So I get paid to do that essentially. So that's like my primary job. And of course there is writing attached to it, but it's writing as an academic, it's scholarly work, it's research. It's not my fiction, it's not like my essays, it's not my reported work.
So you compartmentalize that sort of stylistically and also...
Yeah, I try to, at least. Yeah, sometimes I find, some sort of esoteric language creeping into the rest of my work and I start worrying, but yeah.
For me, it's, also don't primarily make money from writing itself. And getting in advance and seeing how those are portioned off and talking to other artists who have gotten advance, whether they've been lower than mine or bigger than mine, there's this recognition of I can't live on this. I can't live in New York on just this book deal, because you get an advance in pieces. You get it in thirds, you might get it in fourths. If you got a 2-book deal, you might be seeing a big number theoretically, but you're still not getting that all up front, right? You have to deliver on what you're giving, and that gets taxed. So, I got a third of what I got, and I'm like, oh my God, I know like so much of this is going, and I just put it straight into a savings account because I was like, I don't even want to touch this because I know I have to pay for it next year. I don't know how much, but I suspect that it will be a good chunk. So I didn't even touch money that I got for work that I was doing because I knew it was going to be taxed. And I just relied on my full-time job, which I've always relied on because I get insurance through that job, because I get to pay through my 403B and I get deductions on my Metro card. So there are things I don't have to worry about, which is a privilege. It's a really big privilege that full-time freelancers do have to worry about. And it makes it a bit easier to be able to portion off, like, okay, work is done at 6. I can write for 2 hours. And maybe this writing will be done, maybe it won't be done, but I don't necessarily have this deadline hanging over my head like I do when I've written for Forbes or Bustle or Billfold or something like that. So it's less stressful for me in that regards, and I think it's just determinant on how you work. So if you can churn out fast things writing, then that should be, and you can do it and you're fine with it and you're making money doing it, then that should be your method of writing. I'm a slow writer, so I would be starving if I relied on writing alone. So.
And I feel like we should also say that very few fiction writers live on their fiction writing. If you're not like Jonathan Franzen or Donna Tartt, then like you're not living on your fiction money. Like you have a university appointment or you're doing something else.
Or a spouse who may be able to help
Yes.
carry the load while you're writing.
Yes,
Yeah.
actually, somebody who I teach with, I once asked her, how are you able to live on this adjunct salary? And she said, oh, honey, I'm married well. Which was a very Victorian way of looking at it, but yeah.
It's so true. Or a trust fund, there's family money. You never know what's lurking underneath the surface of someone's financial situation, but there's a lot of secret. I worked with a writer, Elisa Solario, who wrote this really great piece. It might have been for Bustle, I'm trying to think of where that was, about how she had written a novel. It was sort of like The Secrets in the writing community, because she had really wanted to be a famous novelist and wanted she had this fantasy about how that was going to work. And she felt so ashamed when that sort of didn't work out financially. And so she started sort of investigating it. And what she discovered is that most people had something else. They either had a side job, which was their more consistent source of income. They had a spouse, they had a trust fund. There was something else that was happening, and that she had sort of been holding herself to a standard that really wasn't realistic. And so she had determined sort of what she needed to earn in order to support herself. She was like, I need to do 20 hours a week, essentially, of personal finance writing, and that allows me to do this other work that feels more creatively fulfilling. But I thought she did such a service to the field by sort of cracking it open and finding out what was happening underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn it over to the audience for some questions.
I have a question about healthcare. I'm a full-time freelancer, so I get my healthcare through the marketplace. And the premiums keep rising and rising and rising. And I deduct it off my taxes, but still, the next year they might rise 20%, people say. I've looked at the Freelancers Union, and the rates are about the same. And they have also this thing, I forget the name of it, that's for people who earn a certain amount of money through freelancing, and then you can set up sort of like you can work with this outside agency so that you sort of pay them and they do some of the administrative work for you, and maybe there's like some way to get better health insurance through them. But as far as I can tell, it's a mess. So how do I make sense of this? Because it's a lot of money out of my pocket every month. And I just thought I'd ask the question, because it's big. For freelancers, it's a big deal.
Do you guys offer, or do you know of any organizations that offer?
So the Freelancers Union
Yeah.
is the first one that comes to mind. Does the Authors Guild do that?
Offer health insurance? Not anymore, unfortunately. We used to. Is there anything that can sort of, 'cause especially with the rates keep climbing.
Yeah, and that was actually happening to us with our health insurance before the Affordable Care Act. It was skyrocketing, especially in certain states.
I just thought I'd ask in case anybody knew some way to
Do you
make it
ever
more financially.
write for Screen at all? Do you write for the screen ever as part of your work? Like, do you screenwriting or playwriting or?
No.
Because the only resource I could think of is the Actors Fund. Actually, like if you are connected in any way to performing arts, they have a health insurance resource center which can at least help. Like they're a navigator, but so if you can think of a way to sort of like tie your work to that field, they do have people who can counsel you and sort of can speak to like the Medicaid expansion and subsidies which can cover. So
Because I called the thing who's at the freelancers union whose name I can't remember. They have a number that you need to call in order for them to call you back and give you more information about it. But they never call you back. So.
Yeah, I think it is a very complicated thing, and you're certainly not alone in trying to navigate that. I wish we had a
it's
solution
broken.
for
It really is a broken system. I think we all just have to put our energy behind single payer and
Yeah.
push.
Yeah.
Is it the Screen Actors Guild?
No, the Actors Fund is a social service organization. So if you, and they serve people in the performing arts and entertainment community, so if there's any way to find an in there, you don't have to be a member of a union or anything like that necessarily.
I don't know, are you interested in part-time work? Because there are some part-time positions that might be able, or do you prefer to just be a full-time freelancer?
I've been freelancing full-time for 4 years now, and I have it pretty much kind of set up. So,
Okay.
yeah, so just not really.
Okay. Okay.
I like my freedom.
Okay.
It is true that they passed
If
a
push
law.
came to shove, maybe.
They passed a law here a little while ago, well, maybe a couple years ago, that if you're more than 20 hours a week somewhere, they have to give you benefits.
Yeah.
So it is something to consider if it's really punching you in the gut. And like, I mean, my boyfriend's full-time freelance and it's like $700 a month.
Yeah, mine's 500.
The facility I worked at, they had to start giving benefits at 20 hours. But I don't
Yeah,
know
It can
if it's
depend on the
It
location.
might be 21, and I only say that because one of my jobs was 21, and so I wonder if it's just over the halftime.
Do you
Yeah.
actually have to work on site or can you work from home?
I don't know. That was just like the facility I worked at had to start giving a lot of part-time people benefits at 21 hours. And of course, it meant they reduced a lot of hours, but to avoid that, but
Yeah.
it's something to think about.
So I have been thinking a lot lately about loans, particularly because I just graduated. So there's a lot going on with student loans, but I also have my own freelance editorial and education business. So I've been thinking about kind of the way that I've been running it originally was just around school, like kind of on the side. But it's picked up a little bit, and I want to think about doing it more professionally, and like doing things like creating a logo and like buying a really nice desk and things like that. But I just don't have the money for it up front, especially with student loans. So I've been thinking about potentially taking like a small business loan to be able to cover some of that upfront cost. But I'm also worried about like if I have so many loans, like is it really worth it to take another one just to kind of get things started, or should I? Am I better off just waiting until I can like save up the money to do things like that? What are your thoughts on loans?
Well, can you go either on deferment with your student loans or do the income contingent plan? Because that might be a way to sort of, if you're just spending less money every month paying back student loans, you might be able to move it around.
Okay.
Yeah. I hate loans. I co-signed them. I had one. I finished paying mine off last year for grad school. I try to look at the cost-benefit analysis in that way, and also the rates and how long you're going to be paying those things too, and the pressure of also potentially paying them both out at the same time, right? So I'd ask a lot of questions about how the interest rate, and sometimes that's dictated by the market. how often can you defer? How long can you defer? For 24 months, or is it 18 months? Is it 18 consistent months? Can you get a cosigner? Could that cosigner help you in any way? What are the rules to remove the cosigner in case, something happens and they're unreliable? And then everyone's stuck with something. And also, how much do you make and how much is that loan? Because sometimes I think, I don't know how it is nowadays, but when I had to sign my loan, they said, this is your plan, pick one. Like, you have 3 options, pick one or 10 years, how much you pay. And I kind of regret the one I did pay, because it was like, oh, I paid a little bit up front, and then with the thought that I would make more money. And then I would pay higher as the years went on, and then things happen, life happens, and then, all the stuff. And it's like, oh crap, I'm paying this, and I could have been paying $200 less had I picked this plan. So I don't know if there's too much jiggle room. For me, there wasn't that much jiggle room. So I don't know if that's an option of, oh, I make $3,000, my loan is $500. Maybe I can put some stuff away. Do I want to charge a credit card? That's interest I have to pay off anyway, but maybe I'm getting points at the same time. So it's like a lot of considerations at the same time. And I'm not, an accountant in that way or being specific, but I'm just so anti-loan, because it's more weight. It's more weight, and you just don't know what'll happen in the future.
And there's always going to be tension between present you and future you, and the needs of present you versus future you. And sometimes we encumber future you, based on what we're feeling in the present. So I agree with this sort of scenario planning. Some people are more comfortable being leveraged. They are okay to take that on. Others of us really feel uncomfortable because it reduces our options in the future. We're basically taking the option and we're saying, I want to use it today instead of having the option of using that money in the future. So really being able to sort of look at, and maybe there's a middle ground, like you save a certain portion of it and then you can get a smaller loan. So like being able to look at these things so that it's not just based on a feeling or an impulse on how you are going to make that decision, really grounded in doing your homework and doing some analysis.
And deduct your logo and all that stuff once you do it.
I think we have time for one more question.
This is for Amanda. It's not a very serious question, but you said you draw pictures with some people. What are those pictures of?
It can literally, like picking out different colors and just sort of almost journaling about money. Like there are some people who are so disconnected. Like the ways that we find to manage our financial lives can sometimes be really interesting and fantastic. Like people who don't have a lot of money, who really, really live on very little, often have a broad social network that they really depend on, of people who are either sort of generous benefactors or just friends who will sort of help prop them up in certain ways. So with this particular person, it was, and she was so overwhelmed and dissociative in a dreamy way whenever it was time to think about money, because it was so upsetting. So for her, it was really just like almost having her journal her life through money. And she was a visual person, so like this looked very much like just sketching things out with numbers. And that was enough for her to at least start to connect, like, I live in this place, and granted it's my friend's place and I pay my friend when I can, but like even sort of getting a little bit of bringing some of that into her consciousness was enough of a place for us to start to put a form on it.
There's also this book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron that people might, and there's a chapter on money too. Like it's a spiritual guide to like unleashing your creativity. And there's a chapter on money and like looking at luxury versus, or monitoring how you spend it and your feelings about money. So maybe that's also something to look into.
I would encourage you all to just like open yourselves up to love money. I think sometimes we feel like it is something that we have mixed feelings about, or we think it's a little bit dirty. But if you can think of it as an energy source, like a resource, that you point toward the things that are important to you, and that you, like one of the there's research, and this is what, I love this, it says that a person's degree of confidence in their financial advisor has more to do with how confidently the advisor states their fee than any performance by that financial advisor. And I think that we can extrapolate that to other fields. Like when we are confident and we express, hey, my work has value, I think that sends a powerful message to others that increases the likelihood that we will be met by someone appreciating and meeting that value.
I think that's a really nice note to end on. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.